welcome. This is our first experience together. We will discuss with Alex about different topics related to sustainable and ethical fashion. In particular, we will touch a topic that I know it seems more academic, but we show how it impacts also local designers and local production of fashion. And in particular, we will talk about Eurocentrism and Neo-colonialism. Don't be afraid, we will explain all later. Alex, would you like to talk a little bit about yourself,
about myself,
your background?
Of course. Why am I here? It's very important, actually, that you should know the context. And do stop me if I speak too fast, because I tend to speak rather fast, okay? So, of course, I'm really excited to be here, and I'm very grateful to Demo Dress and the Stars Project for inviting me. So I'm actually, it all started here in Lecce in the Silente shop, because I went in, we started chatting, and I told them that I was doing research for a book. And then, you know, everything sort of then developed from that first encounter. But let's proceed in stages. So I was born and raised in Italy. So my father was actually from Lecce. He was a Salentine, because he's no more. My mother from the north of Italy, near Turin. And she's also no more, so she was. But when I was not, and I kind of grew up in various places. We used to come and spend some time near Lecce, and then traveled, you know, with the family. But then when I finished we call it maturità in Italy, that is the pre-university diploma that you get is like a baccalaureate, or I can't remember what they call it in Germany, but it's very similar. I decided that I wanted to go and study abroad. And I first went to Paris, and then I can't remember why it didn't work out. But then I moved to London. And once I made the move to London, you know, life caught up with me. So I wasn't yet 20, so I studied, and then I studied some more. And then I started teaching. I did a PhD, then I started teaching, married, divorced. I have a son, and I'm also a grandmother now. But even though I was in London, I traveled quite a lot within Europe and also outside Europe, also as part of my research. And I did my PhD. It was a mix of archaeology and anthropology, and I specialized in South and Southeast Asia, that is India and more or less, South Asia is India and of course Bangladesh, etc. But let's say India. And then Southeast Asia, I focused primarily on Indonesia. I was very interested in the performance traditions of those areas, and I was interested in how they were represented in art, you know, especially the art of the ancient temples with those beautiful reliefs depicting dancers, etc. So that's where I started. I was at SOAS, which is the School of Oriental and African Studies, and it's quite well known as an institution, part of the University of London. So then I started teaching, but of course I couldn't always teach about Indonesia, so I kind of broadened my area, and I started teaching about visual arts and performance. And then at some point, about 11 years ago, I decided to quit my teaching and focus more on my research and writing. And I started, so who am I today? I am a writer. I do quite a lot of writing, including some fiction writing. I kind of branched into that. And I what do I work? And I became interested in fashion already while I was teaching, because fashion is a very, very important component of visual culture. And so my interest in fashion began as an academic. I started teaching about fashion and then researching. So I also do, a bit of modeling. And modeling, although I always say, let's not talk about that in different contexts, I think actually I should explain that I came to modeling by chance and as a mature woman. And I do regard my modeling actually as a form of activism. I am a fashion activist. A form of activism because I represent, it's an issue of representation. And so you don't necessarily see mature women, older women in fashion, so represented, as being worthy of fashion. So in a way, by having somebody like me, and I'm definitely over 60, that is already a statement that I am making and the designers are making, sort of in terms of representation. So I've opened that bracket, I close it now because this is not going to be the focus of our conversation today. So let's talk about my writing. And I have actually published 2 books, both for Bloomsbury, the Dress and Fashion Research series. The first one was Contemporary Indonesian Fashion, which came out in 2019, and which came out of my research on fashion, which I did in Indonesia soon after I quit teaching. I was very lucky to get some funding. I was in Indonesia for some time to focus on fashion, and I looked at Indonesian fashion vis-a-vis global fashion. And of course, I already had a very good knowledge of Indonesian, even spoke relatively fluently Bahasa Indonesia, which is very helpful if you are there conducting research. And I addressed issues of Eurocentrism to begin with, tradition and modernity, and also, if you like, decolonization in relation to these activities, or rather the fashion industry, so decolonizing fashion. And then I kind of became very interested in the work of social tailoring atelier. And so it actually happens just before COVID, and then during COVID and post-COVID, I decided, the idea, because I started reading about it and I thought it was a very interesting research to do. And I ended up writing a second book, doing my field research in Italy, and particularly in southern Italy. So that's where Silente comes in, our encounter in Lecce, but also a little bit in Morocco. And we can talk about that, how I ended up in Morocco. And only a little bit in Turkey. I sort of looked at some social tailoring atelier in Turkey. And you can say, well, they're 2 different areas, 2 different books. Yes and no, they are different. But there is a thread that connects them, and the thread is, again, questioning Eurocentrism and also introducing the idea of decolonizing fashion. And we will get into that, what it actually means. So this is me and why I am here today. I was kindly invited to contribute to the STARS project. We did a couple of podcasts already, which will come out later, I think by the end of this year, hopefully. So you'll be able to listen to me. I will also start another podcast myself, just reading excerpts of my book, because one of the issues I have, academic publishing is a business. One of the issues I have is that hardbacks are not cheap. And until it comes out in paperback, only, organizations, colleges, or people who can spare money can actually buy my book. And I feel a bit ambivalent about it, because obviously I would like it to be read. So, So with the podcast, I can't read the whole book because Bloomsbury will be after me and sue me, but I can read excerpts from my book. And in that way, and together with Google Books, which allows you to read at least 30 pages, people can get a good idea of what the book is about and use it for reference. My hope. Thank you.
Thank you. So, very interesting presentation. Lot of inputs to talk about now. I just noted a few questions, but first I would like to start from a broad question, a broad topic that is related to what is fashion for us. We are all here for the personal relation that we have with fashion and design and all the emotions that bring to us this design and this fashion. So I would like to I will start by asking you what is fashion for you, and then I would like to ask you to comment a sentence that I found in a playbook by the United Nations Environmental Program that is now starting to talk about fashion also.
Okay, let's take it one step at a time.
Sure.
What is fashion to me? Okay. Fashion is the clothes we wear. I mean, we have to wear clothes. We don't walk around naked. We don't live in a naturist society. And naturism is not something that would necessarily, that everybody would be happy to embrace. So you could say, and to me is the clothes that we wear and how we style them on our body. Okay, so the styling is the personal angle as far as I'm concerned. I mean, you could say that combining fashion design and styling is actually rooted in Italian culture because, when you think about it, in Italian, the word for designer is actually stilista, which cannot be translated as stylist. It means something different. And when people actually refer to styling nowadays, they do use the English word styling. And that is because at some point in Italy, in Italian fashion, the designers also started styling. It was a whole movement, if you like. Think of the 1970s and 1980s. So, but the way I see it, is, for me, it's an individual act of creativity, and it's not necessarily tied to trends. So I have been shopping in secondhand stores for a long time. Actually, they started in London long before they started in Italy, and it was a very good way of finding something very interesting. You can still find interesting things now in second-hand stores in London, charity shops as we call them. However, they are now very aware of what is designer and what is not designer. They were not earlier on. So the price reflects that distinction, If you find a Prada secondhand, you pay for a Prada bag secondhand. Okay, let's close that bracket. So I, in a way, with this understanding of fashion, for me, it becomes a way of being sustainable because your clothes don't have to be new and they can be also creatively revamped using various sewing techniques. I sew very badly. I really do sew very badly. However, I do a little bit of sewing from time to time, and I might sort of revamp something, maybe adding different buttons, maybe adding, a zip or something, I try to revamp my clothes because I hate the idea of giving them away and know that then they might end up as landfill. So, that defeats the purpose. Earlier I was very keen on giving away clothes, like lots of people. I would prepare all these bags with my old clothes, and then, I became aware of the fact that they ended up as landfill. And so I thought that we should try and make last our clothing for as long as possible.
Yeah.
So that's fashion to me.
Thank you. And that's very interesting because fashion and clothes are expression of ourselves. we are somehow all in fashion, even if we say the contrary. And now I would like to read this sentence from the UNEP, and I would like to ask you to comment it. Fashion is essential in human culture. So the correlation between culture and fashion and clothes, the heritage, but also modern approach to fashion. What do you think about it?
Okay, let's unpack this. Yes, of course, fashion is a cultural phenomenon. It's one of the reasons why I started actually engaging with fashion. I was very much into art and contemporary art, modern contemporary art. You know, there's a whole trajectory that we can talk about some other time. But fashion fascinated me because, yes, it is part of culture, and I have an anthropological background. And fashion, of course, I mean, you have to distinguish, there's different layers to fashion. We talk about the fashion industry and its ills, but we also talk about fashion as an artistic endeavor, a creative endeavor. So definitely, I totally agree, it's part of human culture. And yes, there is the issue of traditional clothing, although traditional clothing within inverted commas, because you need to question the very idea of tradition and how it is constructed. But yes, I have no qualms with that definition at all.
Thank you. So since fashion is part of human culture, should be also part of our lifestyle, our way of living. And we all know, and it's also the point of our meeting, that the fashion sector is very impactful. We talked about the environmental impact before. So it's a sector that is very polluting, lot of emissions, lot of waste, lot of depletion of resources. And this is also very interesting because the depletion of resources is also related to nations and places where these resources are depleted and overused. And here we can connect to your research and your book. And can we a little bit explain what means the depletion of resources in fashion? I mean, we mentioned the Eurocentrism and colonialism issues related to fashion. I don't know if any one of you ever heard about these two terms related to fashion. Anyone? Yes? No? No? Okay. So we can start by...
Okay, we can start with the basics. Just basic definition. Eurocentrism, the word already tells you. Euro means Europe. Centrism is center. So the focus is, the center is Europe. What do I mean by that? Obviously, there isn't just Europe, but there is also America, Australia, but basically European culture. So Eurocentrism is the practice of viewing the world through a European lens. You can put Euro-American lens, but basically it's European lens. Often assuming that European culture, values and norms are superior. I mean, after all, that is why we had, and we still have, as we had colonialism, we have neo-colonialism. During colonialism, the European nations went out and colonized these people in Africa, in Asia, wherever there were fantastic resources, because they needed to be educated and brought to the level of European civilization. The French used to call it la mission civilisatrice. Actually, it was capitalism expanding and sort of making use of local resources and local, labor. And neo-colonialism, of course, we don't have the dominions. We don't have, India is no longer part of a Great Britain or the great empire. But neo-colonialism is to do with economic domination And so the exploitation of resources, that's why it's called neo-colonialism. So, okay, they are independent nations, but, that relationship is still there. So, and I've already preempted now the definition of neo-colonialism, which is the continuation of colonial power dynamics in a contemporary world, modern contemporary context. Now, specifically in fashion, this shows up when, say, Western brands, let's use the term Western, although, there are some problems even with that, by, say, global North. But it's much easier to say Western brands than global North brands. Exploit resources, labor, and creativity from countries like countries in Africa, in Asia, and in Latin America, but without fairly compensating or crediting them. And it also includes the appropriation of cultural elements without understanding or respect their origins. So think of a phenomena like Japonism, chinoiserie, or even, haute couture maison using embroidery from, say, India or elsewhere without crediting the input of those local embroiderers. This is just an example. But now going back, so these concepts reinforce global inequalities in the fashion industry, and they perpetuate dominance by Western countries at the expense of non-Western cultures. So the concepts of Eurocentrism and neo-colonialism are basically interconnected. And let me add something to what I said about the exploitation of local resources. Now there's been a shift. In a sense, that's why I entitled my book Sustainable Fashion Migrants Embroidery, because the exploitation actually doesn't take place anymore in places like Morocco. It still does, or Turkey, or Romania. It happens right here in the global North, in our cities. Go to Milan and you will find that there are people who, for whatever reasons, because their papers are not in order, etc., they work in sweatshops and they are exploited. They are the migrants. Walk around Lecce, the beautiful centro storico, and in the back alleys you will find many migrants. It's a reality, and it's something we need to come to terms with and try to do something, to really solve this major social issue.
Thank you. And also, I invite you to be present tomorrow in the afternoon, because we will watch together The True Cost. That is a good explanation of we just mentioned here. And also about Eurocentrism and neo-colonialism, I think about Zara or H&M. They are based in Spain, in Norway, but they all produce in developing country, and they use they pay unwage, not fair wages, and they exploit all the raw materials or around the other developing country like cotton in Egypt, and they pollute and they just don't take the responsibility for what and how they impact. This is a problem that we can face all today, and
we will see it tomorrow. Actually, in The True Cost, you will see Livia Firth. Livia is Italian. She was married to Colin, the famous Colin Firth. I think that he's internationally well known. And she's been an eco-activist for a long time, and she's one of the producers of The True Cost. And you will see an exchange between Livia and H&M. And Livia asking questions, and H&M kind of not answering and changing the terms of the discourse, the conversation. And then Livia brings them back to that point. But yes, but I know that you've done this. no answer. It's funny in some ways, but also tragic.
Yeah, totally.
So we can say that Eurocentrism and neo-colonialism impact also local places. We are all talking about rural areas and local design. So touching these terms and these topics, we are underlining the fact that this way of working the fashion system is deploying resources, as we said, but also we are impacting in the life of local people, their culture, their way of working and living. So there are different stages of impact in this problem. And coming back to your books, would you like to tell a little bit more about the Indonesian fashion, how they face this problem and why is a problem there?
Okay, let me ask you a question. I mean, I may be wrong, but I mean, is that something that would interest you? I assumed, and I may be totally wrong, that you don't have much familiarity with Indonesian fashion. But you may know. In that case, I do, apologize for making this kind of assumption. It's just that I know that when I started working on Indonesian fashion, everybody asked me, why Indonesia? What's the thing with Indonesian fashion? Oh, it's all about Muslim fashion, isn't it? It's about, they just wear traditional clothes. And I thought, there's a lot here that, a lot of stereotypes that we need to address. And I wanted to see, because of course fashion is not just in Europe, it's not just in the big centers like Paris, London, New York, Milan, Tokyo and Seoul. This fashion that is made elsewhere, and it's very interesting fashion, and it's not just about traditional clothing. It's a vibrant, creative industry, and that's how it started. I mean, in Indonesia, it really developed as a creative industry soon after the fall of President Suharto's regime. So, I thought it would be interesting to look at Indonesian fashion and see how it relates to global fashion overall. And then it became a kind of mirror, if you like, through which I could see the problems, the ills of global fashion and the fashion industry reflected back. And I thought it was quite interesting. So Indonesia is not just about, modest wear. That's the word that is used. There is modest wear, but it's part of the overall picture. There's quite a lot happening. There is so-called traditional fashion, but it's a tradition that is reinvented, constantly reinvented, and it's contemporized. Thank you. Yes, I forgot the word. Thank you. So that's why I went there and I spent some time there getting to know the whole fashion system, which is encased in a Eurocentric sort of discourse. I mean, there are fashion weeks, there are fashion magazines, there are, of course, models and modeling. There is styling. There is, there is a lot of writing about body image, because, of course, beauty standards and body image are also part of the overall fashion discourse. And so you have the media that present you with certain ideas of beauty and what you should be like and what you should aspire to. And this is particularly for women, but not only for women, because it's a wider discourse. And then, there are also movements that are trying to subvert all this within Indonesia. There are, young people who are totally aware of what is happening, and they would like to put forward a different concept of fashion. And of course, there is the issue of sustainability. Now, a lot of people, that when it comes to sustainability, the word that goes with it most of the time is greenwashing. There's a lot of greenwashing everywhere. Does everybody understand greenwashing? Yeah? Greenwashing everywhere. That's why H&M, they greenwash all the time, and so on and so forth. A kind of greenwashing also goes on in Indonesia at the establishment level, because people will say, but people will be sustainable. We have traditional crafts. We have traditional designs, and we have the batik, the ikat. Hold on. And how is that made? What kind of fibers do you use? They're not necessarily eco-sustainable. There may be chemical dyes that are used rather than the original natural dyes, because to make that kind of clothing, they are kind of the equivalent of a sophisticated piece of haute couture. They're just totally handmade, only for specific occasions, ceremonial occasions. So I wanted to show you, talking about young designers and how they reinterpret. Indonesia is known for its batik. And batik, there are different varieties of batik. It can be hand-painted, and that is the most beautiful batik. It's totally unwashable. It's a painting, basically. And I might show you some examples. There is also what they call the cap. Cap is the Indonesian word, the stamp for the batik. And this is an example of contemporary cap batik. That's also done by hand, with the stamps. It's not machine printed, but the design is contemporary. And it's got two different colors, as you can see, two different type of blue. So this is talking about tradition and modernity, and sort of how tradition is contemporized, because tradition changes all the time. It never stays fixed. Each generation has a reinterpretation of tradition. We'll come to this later. Sorry, I know you have to bring me back to what was the main trend, because I kind of digress. I might show you some images. Okay, so just to recap, when I started doing my research, I decided not to focus on modest wear, because everybody was also focusing on it, and I thought it was so very boring, and it was being constructed as the only type of fashion that you could expect from a country like Indonesia, denying, kind of erasing all its diversity, because Indonesia is a very diverse country. There are so many different cultures in the different islands that make up Indonesia. So let's have a look at some of the images. Okay, so this is one of the Indonesian designers that I have discussed in my book. His name is Auguste Susastro. Auguste is a young designer who trained in Australia as an architect, and then he was a museum curator, and then decided to go to Paris and trained at the École de la Chambre Syndicale, which is the body where couturiers train in France. And then he went back. He went to America for a while, and then he went back to Indonesia. He started his line. Initially, he was only doing women's wear, but then now he's branched out into menswear. So he uses some kind of, if you like, traditional elements in Indonesian dress, but totally reinterpreted for a contemporary context. And he he's not particularly in favor of modest fashion. So you will not find Augusto creating hijabs and things. It's totally secular. Because Indonesian is not officially a Muslim country, although it has the largest Muslim majority in the world. It's not officially a Muslim country. It's very, secular, if you like. Okay, Sebastian Gunawan. I'm talking about Sebastian because actually there is a connection between Sebastian and Lecce. Sebastian is, of course, from Indonesia. He trained at Istituto Marangoni in Milan, where he met Cristina Panarese, who is from Lecce. So then they moved Cristina decided to move to Jakarta and establish, their maison in Jakarta. But Cristina and Sebastian work together. And Cristina is very much a designer as Sebastian is, except that for Indonesia, it was better to call the label Gunawan fashion or whatever it is that they call it now, rather than Panarese, because then it would have sounded foreign, and they wanted to make sure that people understood what the collaboration was about. And Cristina occasionally comes to lecture in incognito. Nobody knows that actually she is a very well-known designer within Asia, together with Sebastian. She was honored by she's a Cavaliere della Repubblica. Yeah.
Chivalry of the Republic is a recognition by the
Italian government. So she was honored for her contribution to fashion by the Italian government. But I know that, we always laugh whenever we meet in Lecce and say you're in incognito, because no one in Lecce knows about her activities as a designer. And she didn't really care so much about broadcasting that kind of activity, because when she comes to Lecce, it's for family reasons, etc. So occasionally Sebastian and Cristina can be seen walking around the Centro Storico. But they are very well known in Indonesia. And actually, I did invite her to come along because she does travel to Lecce quite often. But she and Sebastian are busy with Jakarta Fashion Week, which is taking place this week. And they are presenting their new collection in Jakarta. So unfortunately, she had to decline the invitation and said maybe some other time, although she found it very interesting. And she certainly has quite a lot to say in terms of how sustainable their label is. And, that effort to use specific materials and sort of what they make is high fashion. So it's not necessarily easily affordable, but they can be unique pieces and made with great care. And you can see that they make use of the batik designs or the, even local embroidery, but again, reinterpreted in a very contemporary fashion. So this was just to give you an idea, what it is, talk about Indonesian fashion. Well, what is it? What can we see? Yes, of course, you will see women wearing hijab, because that is also a fashion, but not exclusively hijab. And there was a moment when Indonesian fashion in the global north, in the West, was being constructed just as modest wear. There was nothing else except modest wear or the very, very ancient traditional kinds, sarongs, and which are still used in a ceremonial context, or maybe if they are cheap print sarongs to sort of lounge at home, but they're not. People use ordinary clothes in their everyday life. Okay, back to you, because I tend to digress a lot, so please bring me back to the main focus.
That was very interesting and creative, and also since here in Europe we really don't know a lot about Asian and from designer from other country in general, apart from specific like Japan, and all the nations that are more Western influenced.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, in a way, that was one of the things that one of the problems, one of the issue I debated when I was in Indonesia, when I did say to people, but you're so inward looking. I mean, your fashion is just for Indonesians. And I was told, well, it's very difficult. There are import-export problems. And also, there's quite a lot of us here in Indonesia, so we can be self-sufficient. That was one of the answers, not necessarily the right one, but what is the right answer? The thing about, yes, people tend to be acknowledged, that's part of the Eurocentrism, to be acknowledged in the West, in the global North, if they have a connection with, say, if they had their training in Paris and they have the opportunity to open an atelier in Paris, they might be better known. So that's how we only know about some Japanese designers, but not all of them. And we know about maybe some Korean designers, but not all of them. Yeah, that's it.
And
basically.
This connect again with the topic of rural areas that are forgotten and they just don't have the same access to fashion sector as those that work and live in the main center like we...
Yeah, absolutely. And also you find in countries like Indonesia, again, the contradiction, because there is this lively sort of fashion. There is fashion creativity, there are designers, etc. But at the same time, there is the fashion industry with those large viscose manufacturing plants, exploitation of labor, not so much in Indonesia. I think that, the thing with fast fashion is that it booms wherever you can find cheap labor. So Indonesia, at some point, they asked for the equivalent of a minimum wage. So they went elsewhere. Continue in Bangladesh. Romania has proved very profitable. They just move. That's capitalism to you. It just, wherever you can find cheap labor, that's fine. So you have these contradictions. That's what I'm saying. You have, the creativity, the beauty of the natural fibers, etc. But also you have the viscose plants and, the whole frame of a Eurocentric global fashion.
And before introducing your last book, I would like to ask you to talk together also about the aspect of the mall, because that was a very interesting point in my opinion, because also in this country, also in Indonesia, local designers have some issues.
Oh yeah, let's talk about the malls. Actually, malls, they are American. I don't know whether there are malls in Italy. I think that there might be some malls. Can you please tell me, in the big cities, are there malls in Italy?
Centri commerciali are called in Italy.
Ah, yes, of course. Then centro commerciale, that's a mall.
Yeah.
Okay, yes, there are. And in London, in the UK, not so much. The high street was, pre-COVID, very important. But there are a couple of malls in London. It's just the same one, the Westfield. There's one, and they're always very crowded. So the malls, yes, have taken over. But if you go to Asian countries, it's malls. Go to the big cities, it's malls everywhere. Now, malls have a very interesting function over there in the sense that they are microcosms and they are places where people go to begin with to enjoy air conditioning, to meet up and eat. The food is a bit more expensive than what you find, it's street food, but you have somebody that comes and serves you. So you pay a bit more and it's more it's air conditioned and you can sit down. So, and it's a place where you can use Wi-Fi and it's a place where you can parade and show off your clothes in a way that you wouldn't be able to do in the streets because maybe, there's rain and then, your beautiful Jimmy Choo's handles will get totally ruined. But you go to the mall and you can parade your Jimmy Choo sandals. And I'm using the name appropriately because what happens in Indonesian malls, and I think maybe in other Asian malls, but I'm not sure. I'm talking about the ones I know, and particularly the ones in Jakarta, which, by the way, from next year will no longer be the capital of Indonesia. It's a political move. It's been moved to Kalimantan, one of the islands, but let's not talk about this now. Jakarta is still, the center of everything. So go to a Jakarta mall, and there are several malls. There are the high-end ones, middle-ranging ones, and then sort of the ones that you go for cheap clothing, cheap Chinese stuff, or counterfeit Prada bags. That's big business. And I'm just saying Prada just to give an example, counterfeit, whatever. So what happens in the high-end malls? You go to the ground floor, you enter the mall. Of course, security guards screen everybody, because if you're wearing flip-flops or a kind sarong, you're not allowed in, because, unless you're one of the cleaners, because you have to dress appropriately to enter the mall. And usually it is Western dress, or it might be some very exquisite traditional clothing, that especially women, that you may put on, and that is, we're talking about the equivalent of haute couture. So madam can certainly enter the mall. What do you find on the ground floor? Alexander McQueen, Versace, Louis Vuitton. That's what you find. And you say, and what is Indonesian fashion? Is there Indonesian fashion? You're a visitor and said, but there's no Indonesian fashion. You go up, first floor, you might find Sebastian Gunawan, Sebastian Red. Sebastian and Christina also specialize in wedding dresses. So they have, they call it Gunawan Sposa. They use Italian names from, just to highlight the fact that it's a collaboration between an Italian designer and an Indonesian designer, Sebastian Seba. He's known as Seba. So they might have a showroom, and then people like Batik Chris, they made a lot of money through print batik. It's just machine printed, but they also have some very interesting batik designs. And that's it. In the high-end ones, first floor, you go to a middle range mall. You don't have Vuitton there, but ground floor you have Zara, Marks and Spencer, and then you go up and you may have some Indonesian designers or some Korean designers on the first floor or on the second floor. The top floor is always for eating, restaurants. There's eateries up, and also on the ground floor there are some. The more expensive ones are on the ground floor. You go up and you can get some fast food. So it's a microcosm, and people have actually written specifically about the mall. But the thing is, you say, but then what happens to all these Indonesian designers? Why are they not in the mall? Good question. The mall, it's very expensive to run a showroom in the mall. The rents are extremely high. And many Indonesian designers, especially the struggling ones, they prefer to sell from the showroom or pop-up stores or, online. Online sales are huge, e-commerce. And when I did my research in Indonesia, I did it between 2015 and 2018. So I'm really talking about pre-COVID. I don't know what's going on now because I haven't been back. I would love to, but I haven't had a chance. I don't think that the malls have disappeared. That would be, I wouldn't believe it. I would have to go and see it. I think that they're still there. But of course, there may have been some changes, and people may have even decided, I don't know whether Sebastian still has that many showrooms. For example, he may have just one, or he may have come together with other designers just to cut down, on that huge expense, which is the rental of, the rooms in the mall. And also because, yes, people do go to the mall and they do buy, but they also have other ways of buying. And the people that go to Louis Vuitton, Alexander McQueen, etc., they often come from outside Indonesia. They come there, they have huge amount of cash, bring these big bags full of cash, buy, and bye-bye. They go back. And you may wonder where that money is coming from, but let's not get into it. It's a public meeting.
Probably we will have another talk.
We can have another talk about that. But when somebody comes with a big bag of cash, take it. You wonder, where do you get all this cash from? Where is it coming from? Interesting.
Absolutely. And this is a very interesting glimpse on life in these places that somehow reminds us of our big cities, because we all have the luxury and fashion streets where we find Chanel, where we find Dolce & Gabbana, we find Max Mara, Louis Vuitton, the big brands, and then Zara, H&M, and they are all there in the same street. And they are also, it's also related to the topic of tourism that, if we have time, we will discuss. But I would like now to make a parallel to South Italy and your last book and your discovery about another important topic that are social atelier.
Okay, the social tailoring. Actually, it really started because of two news items. One was about a fashion show that was put together by an organization that is no more and was here in Lecce. It was called Migrants du Monde, and it was twinned with a Migrants du Monde in Morocco. That's another big issue, but there was a fashion show here in one of the palazzi. I can't remember which one. And it was talked about, and somehow that ended up in my mailbox. And I thought, oh, how interesting. And then the organization Migrants du Monde was actually working with migrants, and it was about an exchange of knowledge of embroidery. So they had Salentine embroiderers that would exchange their knowledge of embroidery with migrants, mostly women, but not necessarily only women, who also had some knowledge of embroidery. That was the idea for the project. Okay. And I was intrigued because I thought, oh my God, in Lecce they're doing that. And this is so advanced. I really want to know more. Please forgive me. Because I live in London, I occasionally think, okay, Lecce is a bit backwards. Please forgive me for that, because it isn't. And then there was another interesting article which I read. Again, it ended up in my mailbox, and it was a newsletter of an organization in the UK which is called Fashion Roundtable, and they advocate, for fashion and equality and various other issues. And this article was written by somebody called Melissa Chaplin, and I'm very, very grateful to her, Dr. Melissa Chaplin now. And it was about some enterprises in the UK and also in America that were working with migrants. And so it was about social tailoring. So I was really intrigued and said, well, I really need to know more about this. And so I started contacting people, and then the idea of the book came about because I had to do quite a lot of research, and I thought, well, maybe I can get some funding, which I didn't get initially, not at all, but I was so involved in it, and I said, oh, I have to go and see. So I came to Lecce, and I found that Migrants du Monde had gone. But there was Migrants du Monde in Morocco, so I went to visit that, and I kind of looked around in Morocco, but then I decided that I didn't want to write the whole thing about Morocco. Also, it was COVID times, constant testing, and I couldn't spend months on end in Morocco. I had to go back to London. I encountered Silente, found out a little bit about demo dress and the activities. So then the idea of the book, so I started thinking about the book. And when I thought about the book, of course, I was aware of the initiatives in northern Italy, but I thought, no, I want to talk about what is happening in southern Italy, because of the issue of migrants in southern Italy. And southern Italy has a long history of immigration. People from southern Italy, entire villages from, say, Salento, that you find in Switzerland, or you find them, especially from Sicily, but not so much from Puglia, in the United States. You find them in the large cities of the north in Italy, because even though we are one country, one nation, we speak the same language, there is still a difference between North and South Italy. Historic, it's because in a way you can say that southern Italy was annexed by the northern kings. I mean, let's go back, into this relatively recent history, North and South, and those differences between North and South, which Antonio Gramsci talked about in his famous book, the La questione meridionale, the Southern Question, and it's a book that he wrote while in prison, and it's an important contribution to theory. And he does that analysis, even though it was carried out in 1920s, is still very relevant. So, for example, there are greater, in terms of infrastructures, and this is something that my respondents, my informants, told me when I started interviewing people from social tailoring atelier in the south of Italy. They said, well, you can't compare. There are better infrastructures for business in northern Italy than there are in the south. And especially, if you're a woman, and it's more difficult to set up a business in the south of Italy. I mean, let's face it, it's a reality. So let's talk about such issues. So that's why in my book I said, okay, I want to talk about these social tailoring atelier. And by the way, I have the word social integration within inverted commas because I do question this concept of social integration. It's quite loaded. Like other words like empowerment and even social enterprise. But let's get into that by and by. So I said, I want to emphasize the work that these people, especially women, are doing in southern Italy. And I was very impressed by the work done by some Sicilian social atelier and some social atelier from Calabria, which of course had a very strong anti-mafia stance. I mean, there is mafia. It is still alive. It's international, and there is, and so it's very important. It's called pizzo, the money that you have to pay to the mafia in Sicily, and the anti-pizzo movement is very important and very strong, and the social atelier are aligned with that. So there were all these questions that I really wanted to. Excuse me, I need to get some water. I really wanted to present also because there is a certain image of Italy overseas that, it's colored by a certain perception of Italy, which is pasta, pizza, and Versace fashion. So, the Italians and their dodgy politics and, the Italian characters, it goes back to visions, especially in Britain, of the Grand Tour. I don't know whether you are familiar with the book, it was the movie, A Room with a View, by Foster, which is set in Florence, and, the passionate Italians. Foster also wrote about India, by the way, so I always found some very interesting correlations in his depictions of Italians and Indians. And Foster, of course, wrote at the end of the 19th century, so full-blown colonialism. But let's not talk about Foster today. He's one of my favorite authors, by the way. So that image of Italy, and I thought, okay, let's talk about southern Italy. And please, let's not talk about southern Italy. Lecce, the home of Baroque, the Florence of the South, the wonderful, it's a paradise for tourists. There you are. Now you can ask the questions about tourism.
Served on a silver plate. So we want to discuss the topic of tourism because we cannot talk more about simple tourism. We need to talk about over-tourism. That is like taking over our cities and our also small centers like Lecce that are having some issues, taking their originalities and their genuinity in everyday life because it's all served to the tourists. So would you like to, and we also think I come from North Italy and there Venice is like the main, like a light about this topic.
Venice is... Shall we all become like Venice?
No more part of... it's not lived by local people. There are no Venetians people. It's like I don't know how to call it, like a Disneyland Paris, but it's made for tourists that want to live the art of Italy and the particular lifestyle of Venice.
Yeah, and they want to pay a lot of money to have a coffee in Piazza San Marco, which is overridden with people and pigeons. So why would you want to have a coffee there? But anyway, that's a different issue. Okay, let's talk about tourism, particularly in relation to fashion, because we can talk about tourism and over-tourism in relation to so many other issues. Yes, it is true. And that's my impression as somebody who doesn't live in Lecce and comes here, has started coming back to Lecce, but, after a long gap. And when the first time I came here, after years and years and years, that's also because of my family history, but let's not go into that. In 2020, I think 2021, I was, what's going on here? What happened? I don't recognize this city. Over-tourism, people do talk a lot about over-tourism, and yes, it has an impact on the lives of the locals. Especially young people cannot find accommodation, and so on and so forth. You can say, well, you had lots of tourists in London, you also had lots of Airbnbs. Yes, it's more spread out, and it's a different dynamic. It hasn't, but you do feel it a lot more but go to Cornwall, for example. Go to Cornwall, and then you will find the problems of over-tourism in Cornwall. You can't find accommodation at all. Everything is Airbnbs. So let's not think it's happening only in certain places. It's a general problem. And you don't feel it so much in the larger cities, but you start. I know that Venice is a large city, but there it started years and years ago, and now it's sort of kind of reached, its climax. People have to find some ways of sort of coming down. A place like Lecce, it can be so easily overrun by tourists because it's a small city, and it's already you can see a division between the Centro Storico and the locals that live beyond Piazza Mazzini. That's where we find the locals. You don't find the locals really in the Centro Storico. In relation to fashion, what happens is that then there is this idea that you create fashion that is specially for tourists. And, it sounds grand and magnificent. You have the local craftsmen creating, for the tourists. But it's not quite like that. It doesn't really work like that. And also it does a disservice to those people who are trying to push forward an agenda for a sustainable fashion for everybody, for all of us. Because the idea that there is a fashion for tourism doesn't make any sense. I'm a local, so fashion should also be for me. And so it shouldn't just be concocted so that you can sell it to the visitors, and it's something quite special and pseudo-sustainable. So that's the problem of linking fashion with tourism. I do remember actually at this point having a conversation. I was in Morocco for some time, and I was doing my research. Apart from looking at the Migrants du Monde, I also talked to local designers because, again, Morocco has a very interesting context. Like Indonesia, you have the fashion designers, you have, if you like, an alternative discourse, you have the cheap label, because look at the labels made in Morocco, fast fashion made in Morocco. And then you have this also the government trying to sponsor, to encourage social enterprises. And then you also have, and again, at governmental level, and Morocco is just an example. It's not happening only in Morocco. Fashion that is being linked with tourism, the tourist industry, because fashion then involves crafts, etc. So, and I was talking with this an amazing designer, Kenza Benani, who lived abroad and lived in Italy actually for a long time, and she worked for big brands and so on, and then decided to go back to Morocco and start her own label. And she said, well, linking fashion with tourism is a double-edged sword, and I really would like to keep that separate. Fashion is not necessarily for tourist consumption. I'm not happy with that connection. Yeah, it's good. I'm not saying that the tourist should not be interested in local fashion, but let's not promote local fashion only as something that is ultimately only for tourists. And I think I'll leave it at that, and we can open up a discussion. We can have a conversation around this topic.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. So, any question, any reflection about what we talked about today? Design. What do you think about local design?
That's the other thing. That's my question, really. This overuse of Facebook for everything. Let's not forget Meta. And the fact that Meta is kind of controlling us, I would like to see that develop into a different way of sort of selling, rather than just relying on these big American corporations.
Well, communication in fashion is also a huge topic, and we need to talk also about how communication is impacting our way of consuming fashion. And also we mentioned greenwashing, so big brands that have the opportunity to talk about their sustainable practice, but there's nothing sustainable in that. While small brands didn't have the opportunity, they do not have the opportunity to pay for ads on Meta or any sponsor, any on social media. They just cannot have the visibility and do not have they have to find other ways to show their work. And here also, I think that another important topic is networking for small brands, just to not be push out the market from big brands.
There are different issues actually that you're mentioning here. Communication is very important. The greenwashing, all these graduates from communication schools and fashion studies, etc., who end up working for the big brands, they are very familiar with the terms of the discourse, and so they can create these wonderful websites or newsletters in which they talk about sustainability. They're aware, they've been studying it, and then, they're working, they're earning money, and so that contributes to the greenwashing, okay? So let's put that to one side. The networking. I think this is so important, and this is something that sometimes angered me when I was doing my research for the Sustainable Fashion and Migrants and Embroidery book. There are many wonderful places, small social enterprises, social tailoring atelier, people who are doing fantastic projects working not just with migrants, but the disadvantaged in whatever sense of the word, working in prisons, But what happens is that these small universes, they don't communicate with each other. People don't know about each other's existence, And so then it's what is called the reinventing of the wheel every time. Oh, we're doing this, and yes, it's very new, but do you know about sense of although? Never heard of them. And this is a problem. I mean, I'm making light of it and turning it into a comic thing, but it isn't. The lack of communication, the networking that actually can make the movement much, much stronger than it is. Because otherwise, you might have totally alternative discourse that is very much in the margins and it's not seen or heard of, and people talk to each other. It's a small thing. The fast fashion brands continue, and they're happy to continue. Nobody is boycotting them in any way. And, you have... It's necessary to sort of talk to each other. Even if there are disagreements in the approach, we can discuss it. And then that becomes, as a movement, much, much stronger. And it can have an impact because you need to, at the end of the day, you do need to sell what you design and what you make. And you need to have a customer who is aware of the issues. You don't want to preach to your customers, but you need to have a conversation about these issues and why it's important to be able to invest, say, in an item of clothing rather than buying something that then you can throw away. Hold on, I know here we're talking about the overconsumption, and I totally agree that there is overconsumption that is sort of fueled by the fast fashion industry, but there is also the issue of price and how much people can spend on clothing. And many people who use fast fashion brands, they can't afford to buy sustainable fashion. And I spent some time in California. So, without going totally into that, but, in California, there's very affluent people who only eat sustainably, only organic food and dress sustainably. But then it becomes a class marker of distinction to wear sustainable clothes and eat organic food. And there's people that really can't afford to put food on the table. And yes, they will buy cheap stuff because that's all they can afford. It's not because they're so greedy and they want to buy 10 t-shirts for the price of one or two. But because, they have to live, and you can't blame them at a personal level for making certain choices. But together, we can make a difference, I think. And that's why I am very positive in my conclusions in my book, although I do observe very critically, and I am a very overcritical, actually. In terms of, and I'm not afraid of asking questions. But at the end of the day, I think, together we can be stronger and we can make a difference. So let's talk to each other and let's iron out our differences and then move, because we are not each other's enemies. The enemies are others, and they are very happy to appropriate and make it better for themselves.
Thank you, Alex.
Thank you.
And I think this is the perfect close for meeting of today. Thank you again, Alex.
Thank you for having me and putting up with me.
And we can continue discussing about this topic together during our lunch break. Thank you.
Thank you all.